how did we decide what plants were food, even though, that there was, why do we eat foods with oxalate? I guess
Yeah,
is the question.
mostly because oxalate was hard to measure. And even though we've known about oxalate since the 1700s and started isolating it from sorrel, the original oxalic acid cleaner was called salts of sorrel. And that's because you could isolate it from sorrel. And they sometimes called it salts of lemon because it has that tart flavor that sorrel has. And people would even add a trace of it, a little pinch to their lemonade in order to make more lemonade out of the fewer lemons. So we've been messing around with oxalate for a long time. And then we realized how poisonous it was in the early 1800s when there was a whole series of accidental deaths from that household chemical, because it looked just like Epsom salts, and people would take a spoonful of the white Epsom salts and die 2 hours later because, oops, it wasn't Epsom salt after all. It was oxalic acid crystals or the salts of lemon. Because, people weren't as literate back then. Things weren't carefully labeled and sealed, and you could go to the apothecary to pick up your Epsom salts, and maybe the guy who gave it to you doesn't read and gave you the wrong thing, or the young housemaid that you sent to go get it came home with it and mixed it up because she can't read, who knows. But there was a lot of, that was the beginning of putting poison labels in the skull and crossbones on medicine, and poisons started during that period when people were accidentally consuming oxalic acid. So when it comes to the plants, I don't think it used to be that people ate plants the way we do now. I mean, we've accepted plants now as a central and necessary part of the diet. But that's actually a pretty contemporary idea. I mean, even when I was a kid in the 70s, even salad was really optional. It was a thing that California people did. It wasn't considered so critical to your health. Like if you didn't make your kids eat their salad, it wasn't bad parenting back then. Right. But I really think that the Weston A. Price research suggests that people who were living off the land and didn't have grocery stores and highways and refrigerated trucking lived on very few plant foods, and they were very seasonal. And that people who lived without many plants considered plants starvation foods. They were foods you would only eat if you were going to die from lack of calories. So as a desperation move, you can eat plants, but that's not really what is desired as a nutritious food for humans. That was the attitude, say, in Alaska with the natives there, that is well documented in these older papers. So what's happened in modern times is we invented war, we invented cities, we invented industrial jobs, and we displaced people from their normal ways of getting food, which would be to run around with small weapons. I mean, even 5-year-old boys probably 200 years ago knew how to take down a small animal for dinner. It was a basic skill, I think, that humans had, is how to hunt and gather food. And you could travel, say, from Connecticut to California, 300 years ago on a horse, or even walk there without a wagon of food behind you or a cooler, because you would just hunt on your way. You'd see an animal, you'd take it, and then when you camp, you'd cook it. Like, people didn't need to drag food around because they knew how to get by on animal foods. But I think the love of plant foods comes from this industrialization and war and concentrating people in one place and a sedentary lifestyle. And of course, we got into farming. And then we got into a whole commodity-based economic system that in the US included California's great valley of producing produce. And my theory really is that things like the Victory Garden concept, which were put out by governments, especially the English and American government, especially in World War I, and then sort of repeated in World War II. This is the way we were going to get through this trauma, the stress of food shortages, and perishable foods were harder to get during the war. People were really struggling to get by and under a tremendous amount of terror because of the war and the fear of the death of the soldiers. That plants started to become a hero, because if you gardened, you could save us all and we'd win the war because you gardened, and you could get through these hard times because of growing garden produce. And so the produce suddenly becomes the hero of the war. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? I mean, it's my own theory, but I really think that's part of how we got culturally wrapped our heads around vegetables being so important to us.